For someone whose entire career has been focused on joy, why a podcast on pain? Because these stories need to be told. A good phoenix rising out of the ashes story reminds us all that not only can we survive, we can thrive. And when we emerge, we're different. That's the alchemy of pain. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Alchemy of Pain. This is a podcast where we talk about people that have faced painful situations and they came out the other side different, often better, often with renewed purpose. And when I learned of my guest's story today, I thought, wow, it's just sort of like that crab scampering on the beach and everything's bopping along fine. And then boom, you get hit by a wave, which is news, unexpected news that changes your world forever. Whether you can relate specifically to Kim Curry's story or not, I know you can relate to being sucker punched by life. And that's in essence what this story is about. Kim Curry, it's so lovely to have you here today.
Brenda, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it very much, and I hope I'm good for you.
Well, I know you will be. First of all, when I saw former broadcaster, I thought, ooh, I'm not going to have to talk to him about microphone or technical aspects. I mean, we got that covered.
Got it all
And
covered.
let's just go right there and start with what was the painful experience? Because you had the successful broadcasting career, boop, 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 and then boom. What was the boom that happened?
Well, throughout my life, Brenda, I have been having exacerbations of multiple sclerosis, but I didn't know what they were. They first started in fifth grade. If you're old like me, you remember the presidential challenge where you had to run like 600 yards or whatever to get a little badge, you know. Well, I was running that in fifth grade, and I didn't feel my feet were functioning correctly, and I tripped and I fell, and I got up and I ran some more, and I fell again. I didn't think anything about it. It went away. Later in life, I was in San Antonio, Texas. My arms started curling up, and I thought I'd been bitten by fire ants. Later in life, my shoulder, my eye started failing, my hand, of course, curling up again, and then my toes started looking funky to me. I thought I'd been hit by killer bees. But then in 2004, my wife and my kids and I were here in Colorado visiting my mother for the holidays. And in fact, it was right when they were having one of those tsunamis, and it was white. We were watching videos of the devastation of the tsunami. And my mother looks at my wife and she says, "Something's wrong with him. You better get him checked out." And I looked at my mother. I said, "Mom, I'm watching this stressful thing." And at the time, I was had a very stressful job, and my mom said, "No, Elizabeth, you better get him into the doctor." And sure enough, 3 months later, after some pretty intense testing, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, the beginning stages. Now, those things that I was telling you about that happened throughout my life became consistent in 2004. When I was walking down my office hallways, I had to bounce off the walls with my hands, uh, and it got really bad. So that was where it changed for me. I remember when I was actually at a corporate meeting over in Naples, Florida, and I got called out of the corporate meeting, and it was my doctor. And she said, I'm sorry that I'm now going to diagnose you with multiple sclerosis. And so I walked back into the corporate meeting, told everybody, "I'm gone. I'll see you later." Got in my car, got on my phone, and my wife started doing the 2005 version of Google, only to find out of all the conversation, all the parts that she talked about, the only thing I heard was people die from this. And it's panicked me because I had never, ever dreamt in my life. I didn't know what MS was. I had
So
no
how
clue.
old were you back in
I was
2005?
50 years old. I just turned 50 in April. And it was quite a
That's
shock.
when life is supposed to begin. That's what I
Yeah.
always said. One of my
Well,
passwords, which has since changed, was life begins at 50. Now I say 60. But, so here you are, you're thinking I'm in the sweet spot of life, and you get a diagnosis that scared you, of course. Absolutely.
Well, I had been fortunate to have a really nice 33-year radio career back in the days when a guy like me could make a lot of money being a DJ and running radio stations. And in the last 9 years of my career prior to my diagnosis, I was the program director of the #1 radio station in Miami, Florida. Power 96 was the largest QM in the Southeast USA. The station was doing very, very well. But then when I got diagnosed, a lot of things changed. Specifically, I was I was spooked, and I stopped thinking about the radio station, which was so unlike me because I was quite adamant about having the #1 radio station in Miami. So I actually went into my corporate office and said, "I've now been diagnosed. I'm going to leave because I need to figure out what's going on here."
Mm.
So they gave me a good package, sent me off to my mom's house in Colorado, and that's where I learned how to have multiple sclerosis. When I got diagnosed, I was walking still. I went from that to a cane to crutches to a wheelchair in about 3 years. I was on an MS drug called Rebif for 8 years, and that drug really didn't do anything for me. I was still taking steroid treatments to calm my brain down because if you know anything about MS, your brain is on fire. You get lesions, and depending on where those lesions occur, is the part of your body that's going to be affected. My legs from mid thigh down are constantly in pain. They seize all the time. But what happened after the 8 years of Rebif is my doctor, my MS doctor, Dr. Alan Bowling, suggested I change to a new drug called Copaxone. And at the time, he said, when you're taking this new drug, please take 30,000 IUs every day of vitamin D. Well, because I was a radio DJ way back in the 70s, I used to put my mom on the radio, and she would talk to me when she had a cold, and she said, make sure you take your vitamins. Well, I never thought vitamins worked. So when my doctor changed my drugs to Copaxone and said, take the vitamin D, I only took the Copaxone for 6 months. Without any vitamin D. But my doctor kept calling my wife saying he must do this because I believe that there's a connection between the vitamin and the medicine, and that will make the medicine work better if he takes the vitamin D. So 6 months, no vitamin D. My wife has a panic attack, and I start taking the vitamin D. 6 months later, for the first time, I stopped hearing the fingernails down the chalkboard. I stopped feeling the tenseness in my knee, in my neck, and my shoulders. I suddenly realized, and it took me about 3 or 4 years to finally realize that, wait a minute, I'm not getting any worse. I'm not getting any better. I think I'm a success story. I think I've made it. And the doctor agreed. He says, it looks to us, because they can take the MRIs, my brain calmed down. It was no longer on fire. The lesions were not active. So it took the vitamin D and the medicine change. And then about 3 years later, when I finally told my wife, I'm not getting any better, I'm not getting any worse, this was the best thing that ever happened to me because I'm okay now. And it was good for us, good for me, and good for my wife because first thing I wanted to do after I realized I wasn't having the MS stress, I wanted to document my story. I wanted to document my career, which is very active, very show business type of radio career, very successful career. But then I wanted to talk about what it's like when you're diagnosed with a chronic disease and you realize that there's really no help in the American health system. And so I've become a real advocate uh, about better health care. Um, so that's kind of the story in a nutshell. Um,
There's so much I want to go back and unpack just a little bit, if you don't mind.
Not a
First
problem.
of all, what is this? And forgive me, all men in the audience. Why, when the doctor tells you to do something, do you not do it? You're
That
just predisposed to dismiss vitamins as not important.
Well, that's actually a theme that my doctor talks about all the time. There are men that have multiple sclerosis. They don't talk about it. We refuse to talk about it. And where if you look at the literature that's out there, there's lots of literature about women and multiple sclerosis. There's no literature about men and MS. I do a Zoom call about once a month or 2 months with men over 50 with multiple sclerosis. And that has been 10 guys, and it's been 10 guys for 5 years.
Well, my hope is that more people will know about you and more men will open up. I mean, talk about pain leading to purpose right then and there. I mean, your background as a broadcaster and a communicator now being used to be an advocate and eliminate the shame of owning, I got this, and let's talk about it. You
Well,
know,
it's been very important for me to tell everybody my story. I think and like I said, my main case is the fact that we're the richest country on the planet, and we have the worst healthcare. And I'm a real advocate. I do everything I can to promote everywhere I possibly can my story, so that people understand that we need to get active and try to pay more attention to how our country's taking care of us.
have you sought alternative means outside of the country to get help for your condition?
As a matter of fact, there are stem cell situations, research going on all the time now. About 4 years ago, I tried to get myself involved in a stem cell project, but I was too old, and I understood because there are requirements. But yes, I've been aware of those. As a matter of fact, they're right now releasing information. What happens with multiple sclerosis patients? Our brain goes on fire, but then there's a lining on your on your nerves in your body called myelin. And MS patients, the myelin disintegrates. The research now says that they have maybe found a way to start rebuilding that myelin on your nerves. So there's all sorts of good things happening out there with MS research. And it's funny. I don't know about you, but I know that there's a few million people in America that have multiple sclerosis, but for some reason I see commercials on TV all the time for the new drugs with MS. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, do more people have it than we think? Why is it that, or maybe that's their targeted audience? They're just pushing the buttons on the commercials to me on my TV. I doubt that because I watch network television, but I've seen a whole lot of commercials for multiple sclerosis drugs, and they're all brand new and they're all doing good. And my doctor's really excited. In fact, I'm excited because for the first 8 years I was on MS, I had to take a shot, an injection every day. I was a pin cushion, and eventually the subcutaneous parts of your body start to firm up. And so then when I went on to Copaxone, I only had to take 3 shots a week. I've been doing that now for nearly 15 years. Now there's a new Copaxone that is a 1 shot a month treatment. So that's the advances that I see coming, and I cannot wait till I can only get 1 shot a month. But
That is
that.
so hopeful. I am encouraged just listening to you. I I have to say that for the broad brush, I don't want people listening to say, well, I don't have MS. I don't know anyone with MS. Everybody can relate to being sucker punched by life.
Yes, ma'am.
News that is devastating, changing the course of their lives. I've
I
had it
almost.
myself. And that's sort of what this podcast is about, too. So, from a physical standpoint, your brain was on fire
Yes, ma'am.
because of the MS. But mentally, how did you cope with the diagnosis and how did you find the strength and the resilience to keep going?
I didn't like it, and I was an athlete. I was a golfer. I played basketball every week, sometimes 4 or 5 times a week. And I didn't like it. It really affected me. And it ripped me out of the career that my father got me started in 33 years prior. So I really had some mental problems with the diagnosis. When I was diagnosed, my doctor said, go back into your office and see if anyone thinks that you've been a little abrasive lately. And I thought, no way. I run a real tight office. We love each other. And I went back and asked my secretary, hey, have I been a little aggressive lately? And she's like, yes. Well, that was the MS. It causes that. It causes anger. And so for a long time, I was not the kindest person you could be. But again, once you see that there's an end to this, once I started feeling that, wait a minute, things are going to be okay. Then, my wife, it was my wife who finally said, after, and this was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. She simply said, you got to stop being so mad about being in that wheelchair. And that simple thing from my wife, which she'd never said before, but she finally one day after I had gotten upset about something, said, you've got to stop being so mad about being in that wheelchair. And when I finally realized, wait a minute, man, there's nothing I can do. This isn't going to change. Let's work harder at being better. And it really, this whole story that I'm telling you really, the reason it's changed my life, and I say to you that MS really was a good thing for me. My wife was my date at the Grammys every year when I was working, and then suddenly I have to get out of work, and then she's got to hit the employment line. But when I met her, she had already worked in an attorney's office, a family law office, and she was working in finances when we got married. So my wife had things. When we got together, her thing was running my life because I was busy traveling around the country. I was doing radio things everywhere. So she was like kind of taking care of me. Well, then when that shifts around, and then my wife decides, we had taken all our money out here to Colorado to invest in properties, did some fix and flip. She didn't like it, so she went out and got her own real estate license. She didn't like the way the people were treating her. Well, she goes and gets her license. Within 2 years, has sold 123 houses in my little little town, breaking actual per capita records in the state, which got the attention of her corporate office, which was Keller Williams at the time. So then they make her a coach so she can teach other people how to sell houses and how they can work harder at doing that. Fast forward now, my wife is the CEO of a real estate firm. And so me getting MS is like, wow, I'm okay. My wife is a superstar, and we just get to live a real good life now. So it was shocking. It destroyed me for years. My wife stopped me from acting like that. And the whole time she's got this thing going on in her career. And like I said, 6 months ago, became a CEO. So this has been quite a ride that we've ridden on. But as
Which
I
makes
said,
me want to interview your wife as
that
well,
happens a lot to me.
because there is her side of the story, which
Yes,
is
ma'am.
the pain of your partner getting a chronic diagnosis and it upending life as you knew it, and she had to reinvent herself. I think
Some,
you're
some
a
people don't.
beautiful
Some people
couple.
don't stay with you. I have the men over 50. Half of them, their wives walked out. So when I got diagnosed, I knew there was a threat, but my wife has never backed off. She's made sure that I have everything that I need. I've got lifts, 2 lifts in my house. I have the stair thing where I sit in a chair and it takes me up to the third level of my home. I've got hand controls for my car so I can drive my car. I have 2 separate wheelchairs, one in the car and one that I'm in right now, just so I can motor around the top floor of our house. I have an electric wheelchair downstairs. My wife has done all of this because the government doesn't pay for this. This is you. This is out of your pocket. And my wife says, whatever it takes, you're going to live a normal life. And there's nobody I'm more proud of. So,
I think that's beautiful. Kim, you seem like a really happy guy.
yes, ma'am. As I, and it's really been a good couple of years. I mean, we have realized once everything started calming down with me physically, and once my wife started doing her thing, and then I started writing. I've written 3 books. I'm on my 4th right now, and my last book is being considered for a mini series. So there's good things happening in our life, and all I can do is remember the day when I was driving across Alligator Alley back to my house, and my wife said, "People die from this," and we are not there anymore. You know,
Do you think if you were still running the top station in Miami, you would have written any of those books?
no, man. I would have. I was a real radio guy. I lived, breathed. When you're the program director of the radio station, you're responsible for every minute of the day. And I took that very seriously. And I was educated by 3 very smart radio people who expected me to be better than them. So I was very active at my radio station. What happens at 3 o'clock in the afternoon's got to be perfect. It's also got to be right at 3 a.m. And the only guy who can check to make sure it's right is me if I get up and turn the radio on to make sure people are doing what they do. So it's all I thought about, all I lived until the day I got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Everything came to a screeching halt. I would have never written these books. And my wife would have never seen her joy. That's what really, I'm happy. I'm yeah. Are you kidding? I thought I did well. My wife is killing it, and she has people who love her and work with her, and has had over a decade now of coaching clients around America and around the world, as a matter of fact, with different businesses that have all benefited from my wife, and so. What was scary is now really a pretty good life.
When you choose to see the blessings in even the sorrows, I think that's, the scriptures talk about making beauty from ashes.
Yes.
And it sounds like what you've built is a beautiful life out of what had been ashes.
Every day we wake up and we can decide what we're going to do with that day. I prefer positivity. I prefer progress. And that's what I do. And that's where we are.
So Kim, I know that you have a hard deadline because you have an appointment with your wife right after this. And
I've got
gosh
to
knows,
go.
I don't want to get in the way of that.
Well, I'm the guy that makes lunch. I'm the cook. I'm the chef at the house, and I have a really nice Wolf stove. It's one of those big ones, and I cook all the time. I'm not supposed to stand up too long. We designed the kitchen to where I can hold onto both counters and swing my legs around, and so I've got to go cook my wife a pan con lechon for lunch today. That is bread and pork. So we're having pan con lechon for lunch, and she only gets 30 minutes. But you and I have 10 more if you have time. So.
Oh, well, good then. I'm going to take it. So you approached life with positivity, but were there ever moments in all that? I guess there had to be moments where you said you were angry, where you wanted to give up. I mean, something provoked your wife to say, you got to stop being mad. So
Well,
it wasn't like it was smooth sailing. Clearly, it wasn't. There were dark times in the
absolutely.
process.
But then when she's with me all the time and everything is okay, but you're still mad about being in that wheelchair. You've got to stop being so mad because everything was okay. I was just starting my writing thing and was learning how to. In fact, when the pandemic happened, I was doing a podcast daily that had 500 and 600 people a day that were watching. I called it One Cocktail with Kid because everybody was drinking too much during the pandemic. So Kid Curry, the radio name, and I've been in Washington, D.C., Baltimore, San Antonio. There are Kid Curry fans all around America. So I started a podcast and I just called it One Cocktail with Kid. That's all you can have. And I had guests. I mean, I have some pretty famous friends. My friend Robert Walker produced the Gloria Estefan play. His wife is a big choreographer and producer and film writer, film producer. I've got the guy who does the voice of Shrek, of the donkey on Shrek, whatever that donkey is. He was one of the guys I worked with in Miami. He was on. Mark Mosley is the voice of. He was also there was a TV show like there's an Eddie Murphy takeoff, and so when Eddie Murphy doesn't want to go in and do the recording, Mark Mosley goes in and does the recording. So
Oh,
I've got
wow.
some fairly active and famous friends who created an audience for me, and it just gave me a chance to get my mind off the pandemic.
Mm.
People want me to come back and do podcasts, and I understand, and I know I've got fans out there, but to me, that's almost too much work. Because I have to think. I'd rather be coming up with a scenario for my next book. So,
I love that. So it seems like there is another whole book about your life in radio.
well, there is. It's called Come Get Me, Mother. I'm Through. I used to have a little feature I would do. I was a nighttime DJ for the beginning of my career. Kid Curry on at night made sense. As you can tell, I don't have a big, deep voice. I sound like a little kid. So I used to have a feature at night, 10 minutes before the end of my show. I'd have the kids call in and they could say whatever they wanted. They could throw a line at their mom or get on their school or a teacher or something. And at the end of that feature, I would say, okay, that's the end of the show. Come get me, mother. I'm through. Because Kid Curry, his mother's coming to pick him up. It just seemed right to me. So I've written that memoir. Everything is in this book on my career, and it explains the diagnosis, and it makes you realize the cost of bad health care in the country. So
Mm.
that's what the memoir is all about. The other two books are things
Well,
I've
I
written
see
about.
the title of the other is The Death of Fairness. What
Yes.
the heck? What the heck's that all about?
Okay, in 1987, people don't remember this. In 1987, President Ronald Reagan rescinded the Fairness in Broadcasting Act. Now, that Fairness in Broadcasting Act had the fairness doctrine, which had been in broadcasting since the very beginning of radio. And that doctrine simply said, if you, as a citizen, hear someone lying on the radio or on television, you have the right to go demand equal time to prove the lie or dispel the disinformation. Well, that law was in effect until 1987. And when Reagan got rid of that law, suddenly everyone could lie uh, without stopping. And you see what's happened to this country since now you even have a news network that lies and they admit that they lie. So that was the death of fairness. It really is the story of what happened to a small American town, the town that I grew up in, after Ronald Reagan rescinded the fairness doctrine. And the reason this story is important to me is because it's really a discussion that my dad and I had. My dad was on the radio. He got me started. Reagan rescinds the fairness doctrine. The radio station that was my hometown station had all the hometown guys on it. They started firing the hometown guys and putting these talk shows on with all these lies. And it used to bother my father. He said, this town is changing because of all the lies that are on the radio. So it really affected my father. So I came up with the book, and the next book, Bonnie's Law, The Return to Fairness, she teaches you how you could bring that law back because it's only legislation. Trust in knowing that if you could pass this, it comes up every 2 or 3 years. The Democrats want to bring back the fairness doctrine because they think that we need to stop the lying. But unfortunately, there's one political party who gets advantages with lies.
Well, I
And
think in fairness,
yes, ma'am.
there are not just lies on one side.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely
But I
not.
remember this well because I was a journalism major, graduated 1985. We were taught the fairness doctrine. And then I remember as my career began, and you used to see on the local TV stations people requesting their time to rebut something they felt was inappropriate or dishonest.
I used to have to grant those people the time when I was running radio station.
Yeah, wow,
So,
how things have
but I just,
changed.
it's unfortunate, and you're right, yes, but there has been, for some reason, there's been, I'm going to just even say it, Rush Limbaugh, the king of disinformation, the king of accusing. Um, and the Democrats have never really come up with anybody like that. They tried with a few people, but for some reason, peace and love doesn't create all the furor. And, I just,
Drama, it's almost as if, and again, the opinions expressed on the
yes,
Alchemy of Pain podcast are those of the guest and
of
not
us, yes,
necessarily the host producer.
yes,
And you're welcome to say whatever you want to say. But it does feel like the world is drawn to drama, maybe because it takes our minds off our own pain rather than dealing with our own stuff. We'd rather be distracted by something extreme or seductive, almost like you just sort of have to watch that car wreck when you're driving by and you go slower. It captivates you. I know
it's
in
true.
my own life, distracting myself through whatever means, whether it's media or alcohol or whatever, because the feelings of this life can sometimes be too difficult to bear.
Yeah.
And so I know that what's behind a lot of this is escapism. I'd rather escape than deal with life
True.
and deal with the facts. That's
Yeah.
just my opinion.
Well, I always had respect for that man. In fact, I went to visit the White House right after he got assassinated because I had well, no, right after he got the attempted assassination, because I had a friend at the White House. His name was Frank DeFramer. He was the framer of all the portraits, and he and I were friends. And I went over to the White House while Reagan was in office. I always wondered, what did you expect? I mean, did you really look forward enough to see what was going to happen? Because I just think there's just too much division, which is
Mm,
caused by people accusing and not being able to present facts.
yeah.
And when you can't present facts and just let people just go off on their own and any tangent, it's caused problems in this country. And I don't, know what the answer is going to be. I do know that the fairness doctrine comes up every now and then in Congress,
Yeah.
but
Wow.
it never gets any further than just bringing it up. So
Well, I'm really glad you brought it up here because you've brought up something that those that weren't in journalism school maybe never heard of or haven't, it's just not been on their radar. We used to learn about yellow journalism and how it was so important to be impartial. Journalists, that
that's
was
what
the
that
badge
was
of
our job.
honor in
Yeah,
journalism, is to be impartial
yes, ma'am.
and to ride that balance and to check yourself to make sure that you weren't trying to lead the audience. Oh boy, this is we're talking a foreign language to most people today.
Brenda, unfortunately, our 10 minutes is over. My wife's
Well,
going to
we
be.
used it, but I'm glad we did. Okay, so one final thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Someone who's been sucker punched by life, what would you say to them?
I think there's an answer again to every situation, but you have to wake up with the idea that I can be better. I can help fix this. When you're defeated and you believe in defeat, it's not going to be good for you. It's good for your body to be positive. It's good for your mind to be positive. So when you wake up in the morning and you think, oh, I don't know what to do, figure out a way to make it positive. Figure out a way to look outside, see the sunshine. We got rabbits in our backyard. We got birds everywhere. I find a thrill of watching a good sunset or a good sunrise. You have to purposely decide you're going to make it better. And that is just a thought process. So anybody can do it.
Fabulous way to end. I want to call you Kid Curry. Kit Curry. It was a pleasure and a privilege. And I thank you for tuning into this edition of the Alchemy of Pain podcast. I hope you were encouraged. As I always say, if you're in that chrysalis, keep pressing. You are creating strength in your wings so you can fly. And I'll be rooting for you. Have a great day.